Hi, my name is Michelle, and you are listening to Life with Tarasai. It's been a while since I had the opportunity to be in front of the mic again, and I decided I wanted to use this space to be vulnerable and a little bit of an open diary, a digital diary, because being vulnerable with people and in these kinds of online spaces hasn't been something that I've ever done or ever necessarily had the desire to do so. But what encouraged me to start Life with Tarasai, this sort of podcast series, was to challenge myself to explore and discuss nuanced topics and things that interest me and things that scare me. So, in this week's episode, I wanted to talk about how the need to create content is killing our creativity. It is killing our ability to live presently in the moment and eroding our sense of self and what it actually means to produce something meaningful and soulful. Now, I published the article on my Substack, and the title is called "I Don't Want to Create Content." And I saw a really interesting. I saw something interesting a while back ago. I can't remember exactly what it was, but this person was talking about how I hate whenever you produce something and you put it out into the world, it is perceived as content. And I use air quotes as I say content because I guess in this digital age and the way sort of language evolves, whenever we now start talking about things that is just like you've written something or you've drawn something or maybe you've just whatever you decide to put out on the internet, it is labeled as content. And I think this is a really interesting take and this perspective, especially as somebody like myself who I choose to write both fiction and non-fiction work, and it is basically my heart, my soul, my opinions, my thoughts, my knowledge collated and put into words, and maybe a collection of like pictures and maybe videos, in order to articulate what I'm thinking and what I'm feeling and the message I want to get across to whoever is reading it. I don't even say the audience, but for me, I think about when I write my art, it is about how the reader is going to feel and what they take away from it. And I hope that they connect with something that I felt, which is why I chose to write what I write. And this person was expressing their frustration with these kinds of things being labeled as content. And I think a lot about how, especially in this day and age, if you decide that you want to be a writer or an artist or anyone that produces art, I'm going to talk about art specifically. When you decide you want to become somebody who produces art, because we consume so much and we scroll a lot, and it is a doom scroll, which means it is endless, it is a void, there is no bottom, there's no end to it. Um, there isn't an infinite amount of content in the world, but we only have the ability to consume so much to the point where it might as well be infinite, at least in our reality. And we will scroll forever, we will read forever, we will take in new information forever. And it is done so mindlessly, without intention, to the point where all things that we consume online can be considered content. And I think this is really scary, especially for people who choose to be creatives and their art is about self expression and connection and community and highlighting things about the world, atrocities. It's revolutionary. It is not without intention. At least most good art is not without intention. And in this piece, I break down a lot of my own reflections, but I basically say I don't want to create content, which means I don't want to optimize my art. But I understand that living in a capitalist model, in a capitalist world, where everything can be commoditized, where when you have a hobby, something you do good, something you do well, there is the idea that in order to succeed within that thing, you must profit off it. And this is not to say that we should not celebrate when people make money or when they find success in the things that they do, and especially if it is financial success, because money is power and it does allow you to do greater things. But the knowledge we gain from consuming art is not just monetary. And it is not just about being able to create something else. It is about sitting with it and allowing it to embellish our soul and allowing it to move us, to change us, and to affect how we engage with other things. And I would say, I believe this is the intention of most artists, is to have that effect on people. But this mode that we live in, we could easily say doesn't feel like it allows for that. And I do take the time to go a little bit further into reflecting on some of my favorite writers, activists, and revolutionaries, ones that definitely shaped my mode of thinking in my formative years as an adolescent. Specifically in this piece, I talk about Baldwin, Maya Angelou, Asada, Frantz Fanon, and how they produced such deep, thought-provoking works about race, gender, colonialism, and oppression amongst black people, black women, and how their writing still continues to prevail and have impact, and their ideas mean something. And I think about how when they were writing, when they were creating, and they were coming up with some of these ideas that we still study to this day, and people take the time to read, and people still borrow their books from libraries, and they annotate their works, and it shapes their consciousness, the black consciousness, the female consciousness, as well as perseverance and reflections on oppression of people within the West. They were probably not concerned about how many copies can I sell in order to get my message across so perfectly so that it's completely optimized and we're continuing engaging. But I believe they thought a lot more about what community of people does your art bring in. And that's what I want to think about when I do my writing, when I publish my work. It is not about how many people read it. I think if the story, if it reaches multiple people, that is amazing and that is beautiful, but it is about the impact. And this is something that I've always tried to emphasize in my work and all that I do. But at times I feel like I'm not doing enough and I'm bringing myself down, because the expectation in this mode that we live in is that there needs to be a profitable outcome, and it needs to have longevity in terms of how can we continue to mass produce this idea, this art, this creation, as opposed to just letting it sit and letting its impact move through people. I was a bit superficial in thinking about how these people probably lived their lives. Obviously they felt the weight of oppression, living in that time in the 60s, 70s, 80s, maybe even going back further than that. They had the weight of the world on their shoulders, and black people were definitely not able to find peace so easily, at least not during that time. I mean, even now, we look at the state of the world. But I believe those moments they had where they could sit in the sun, have a smoke, discuss, talk, feel, where they had moments alone in their rooms, where they traveled, where they lived a life full of joy, where joy was their weapon against the people that actively worked to revoke their word and to not have their work out in the public. And we have that now, and we're seeing that now again with mass censorship. I think about how those moments that they had of peace and quiet and to just live affected their art and their creations and how they thought about the world. And I finish the article with exploring ideas around how the busyness of our lives and what we feel this world demands of us and what this world has demanded of us and what we're expected to do, especially in this capitalist mode of productivity where our labor needs to be fruitful, it needs to contribute to the growing nature of our work, of our study, of our wellness. Nothing can ever just be and sit presently. And we are unable to allow ourselves those moments. We may have those moments of quiet, but we must allow ourselves to actually sit in them and enjoy them. Because if we don't do that, we're not actually able to allow ourselves to be well and to find peace and to be at ease, because we are constantly anxious about what we should and shouldn't be doing. And that is something that I don't think has ever stopped plaguing me since high school, which is this incessant need that I should be doing something else, as if my moments of peace are not a form of liberation and enlightenment. There's a quote in the article, just to finish this episode off, which is, each generation must, out of relative obscurity, discover its mission, fulfill it, or betray it, by Frantz Fanon. And I tie this back to my point of, we as defenders of art and intellectualism and thinking and thought, as people who strive to know more so they may do more with what they know, we are aware of how this world distorts our passion and how this world eats at our joy and labors us so tough to the bone that we feel exhausted, that it is easier to do nothing, and to do nothing to the extent of just consuming. And we no longer create, we no longer give ourselves moments to nourish and take in what we are learning so that we may build. We are aware of the world we live in, of our reality. And because we are aware of it, I believe that our mission is to fight against it. To not feel like we have to constantly be making content in order to keep up with the algorithm, because that is soulless. And we do not want soulless work. And I think what I'm trying to say is that capitalism demands soulless work, because it is not about the nature of what you are creating. It is about the fact that you are just creating. And I say relinquish yourself from the desire and feeling the need that you have to do that. Do not betray yourself by feeding into that demand. You've already done that. But because now you are aware, you don't have to anymore. And I end this episode on that note. Thank you for listening, and see you next week.